Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lili Gonzalez, Executive Director of the San Antonio Book Festival. Welcome to this special event, Revolutionary Women of Texas and Mexico. This panel has been generously sponsored by the San Antonio Area Foundation. For more than 55 years, the Area Foundation has been helping donors achieve their charitable goals for the greater benefit of the San Antonio community. In short, San Antonio is a better place to live because of them. They have been a longtime sponsor of the book festival, and we are forever grateful for their support. Thank you to Margie French and Stephanie LaFrascia and everybody at the San Antonio Area Foundation. We're so proud to feature this beautiful and significant book published by our friends at Trinity University Press. If you haven't purchased your copy, go ahead and click on that Buy the Books button below to order your copy from Nowhere Bookshop. I'm honored to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Norma Elia Cantú, who provided additional context to the stories of these empowering women who revolutionized Mexico and the world, and who will lead the conversation with Kathy Sosa, Ellen Riojas Clark, and Cynthia Orozco. Dr. Cantú is the Norine R. and T. Frank Murchison Distinguished Professor of the Humanities at Trinity University. Her recent works include, it's going to be a lot of them, Transcendental Train Yard, a collaborative suite of serigraphs, Cancula, Snapshots of a Girlhood in La Frontera, updated edition, the co-edited anthology Entre Guadalupe y la Malinche, Tejanas in Literature and Art, the anthologies Teaching Gloria and Saldúa, Pedagogies and Practices for Our Classrooms and Communities, and Mexicana Fashions, Politics, Self-Adornment, and Identity Construction, the novel Cabañuelas and Meditación Fronteriza, poems of love, life, and labor. Whew, I'm tired. Please welcome Dr. Norma Elia Cantú.
I would like to begin by acknowledging the tremendous work of the San Antonio Book Festival, and Lili especially, but also the San Antonio Area Foundation for their support of this particular session. And also to all of you who have joined us, muchas gracias. It always is a pleasure to be on the other side of the screen, although I can't see all of you. Gracias de todo corazón. We have three wonderful speakers that I'm going to be platicando, just chatting away. Kathy Sosa, who has been a teacher, a marketer, political consultant, designer, curator, entrepreneur, activist, and artist. So an artivist. Her art has been featured in national media, and she has participated in more than 36 exhibitions, including with the Smithsonian Latino Center and at the Smithsonian affiliated museums. Our second participant is Ellen Riojas Clark, my colleague at UTSA, a professor emerita at UTSA. Her research examines ethnic and cultural identity and cultural studies topics. She received 3 National Endowment for the Humanities grants and was a cultural director for Maya and Miguel, a PBS program. And she is executive producer for Latino Artist Speaks, Exploring Who I Am series. And her many publications include Multicultural Literature for Latino Children, Their Words, Their Worlds, Don Moisés Espino del Castillo y sus Calaveras, and a forthcoming book, Pan Dulce, a compendium of Mexican pastries from Trinity University Press also. And our third participant, longtime friend, knew her when she was a grad student, Cynthia Rosco, professor of history and humanities at Eastern New Mexico State University in Ruidoso in New Mexico, hence the Ristra de Chiles back there. She is the author of No Mexicans, Women, or Dogs Allowed, The Rise of the Mexican-American Civil Rights Movement, and co-editor of Mexican Americans in Texas History. She serves on the advisory board of the forthcoming Handbook of Texas Women's History. And most recently, her new book, Agent of Change, Adela Zlos Bento, received the Liz Carpenter 2020 Award for a Best Book for Women in History from the Texas State Historical Association. Felicidades, Cynthia. Quite an honor. And so we'll just jump right into our conversation today. One of the important questions is how does a book come about? I really hold that every book has a life, and it is born, it lives, and then it goes into obscurity, but not this one. This one is going to live forever because it is such an amazing book. So, Kathy, could you tell us? I know you had the idea, it's in your bio here that I didn't read. And so, how did you come up with this idea of gathering bios and painting? Because you also did the artwork, Revolutionary Women of Texas and Mexico.
Well, the book idea found me. I didn't really find it. I was in a folk art shop in Bernie in 2009, and I'm sorry, I don't know why my computer is ringing. So the idea, well, I was standing there shopping, and a fellow came up to me and he handed me an essay that he had written. His name was Lance Aaron. I didn't know him before that, and we're friends now. And he asked me to take the essay home and read it. And so I said, sure. And I read the essay, and I was surprised because it told the story of the massive numbers of people, the tsunami of people who came north during the Mexican Revolution to escape the revolution and to, find a new life. And the numbers that he quoted, hundreds of thousands, upward of 1 million people, were astounding to me. Not because I didn't think it couldn't happen, because I didn't know why I didn't know that. If it had happened, why weren't we aware of that? Because my husband had told me the stories of both his grandmothers, who, two women, didn't know each other, but really a very similar story. Being alone without a man. Men were conscripted into revolutionary armies. They were or served with the federal army, or they found it a good time to seek adventure. But these women were left alone with no man and little kids, and they made it all the way to the border, where they got on a train and got down in San Antonio and started from zero, from nothing. Their credentials were no good here. What was good here was there was a community of people who spoke Spanish and who were of their culture, so that they had something of a soft place to land. But they landed with very little to start over with, financially. So you know what we had never imagined that those two stories were more than a random coincidence. They were just two stories from his past, and there you go. But if this essay was true, then almost everybody we knew of Mexican descent would not be here if it weren't for the Mexican Revolution. So we said, well, let's test this theory. Nothing against Lance, he's a great guy, but we were amazed that we didn't know this story, and we should have known the story. So we set up camp at a little restaurant where all of our friends went for breakfast almost every day of the week. And we just accosted people as they came through the door and coaxed them over to our table and said, do you have a grandmother or another ancestor who came to San Antonio during the Mexican Revolution? And every single person said yes. I mean, there were dozens of people, and the dozens of people, every walk of life, people you've heard of, people you haven't, people who make decisions in this town and in the country and in the world, and who we know, and everyone said yes, every single one. So it was like we felt like we had walked into a void in history, into a piece of history that was not at all well known enough. So people could say, this is where I'm from. This is the big impact that this wave of immigration made. And look what a different town, look what a different state, look what a different country we would be if this hadn't happened. And so we started brainstorming, this could be a this could be a documentary series on KLRN. Oh, this could be a coffee table book. And oh, this could be a book about women and how they change societies and how they change countries with their actions. So the first two projects came about fairly quickly within a year or two. The book about women has taken a lot longer. It has a lot more moving pieces, a lot more participants. And so, I'll be honest with you and say it's taken a lot longer than I thought, not knowing how the world of publishing works. But then I'm comforted to know that this book has come out at the right time, because the reception that the book is getting is so incredibly positive and widespread. So that's the birth story of revolutionary women in Texas and Mexico, in not quite a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Indeed, it is the birthplace and the life story. And I'm going to turn now to my colleague, Ellen Riojas Clark, because over the years, she and I have had a lot of conversations about the importance of showcasing Latinas and Chicanas, especially, so that our young women have role models, so that they know that others have done it, que sí se puede. And so, Ellen, could you tell us a little bit more about how you felt that this was a worthwhile project, and for many reasons, but maybe particularly for that?
I sure will. Well, as having seen Cynthia in 30 years, I've been in academia over 40. And when I first started teaching, first thing I started looking for were textbooks or secondary readings that would reflect on who we are as people of color or Mexican American or as women. And that was very hard to find. So I remember getting some of the early people writing, Alicia Gaspar de Alba, Cynthia later on, to have textbooks that we could use, but they were hard to find, very hard to find. So what it does tell us in academia, they're not reflected in textbooks or even secondary readings or even as topics of conversation or investigation or research way back then. Fortunately, we of course have many historians, sociologists, and so forth that are now writing, but that's in academia. So if we look at textbooks in high schools, middle schools, etc., you're not going to find us in those books. And that, to me, it was just such a shortcoming, because I knew that there were people that had voices and had many significant acts that could have been written about. So it's important for young women to see self reflected in the mainstream, because that's where not just aspiration, but the fact that you can do something. It helps determination. It certainly helps identity. And it certainly helps the acceptance of who we are. So is there a need for textbooks that reflect us in textbooks from women and from people of color? Absolutely. And so I think what this book has done, I'm going beyond your question a little bit, has done is not only to bring us to the forefront, but in a very easily accessible manner that everybody can enjoy, not just academics, not just people, students in colleges, but in high school and so forth, can learn about women that they might never have heard of. Besides that, I learned a lot also, like you, Norma. There were people in the book that I had not heard of. So important, the time is long past. The time is not only now, but in the future. So I think that what we can do is to inspire young women and to study and to research and to know their worth is also represented in the printed word.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned the inspiration part, because it is inspiring on many levels. Yes, for the young, even young millennials, to see what they can do and go forth. but also for scholars and people who are artists. And it's just the whole diversity of approaches and life paths that you have highlighted in the book. And I'm going to turn now to Cynthia Rosco, one of the authors in the book and a historian, good friend from way back, because I think it fits this question about the influence and the inspiration, but also the necessary, for me, the necessary act of reclaiming our history, of highlighting those women that may not be, like you say, in the textbooks, but whose work makes us who we are. They lead us to where we are at. So Cynthia, could you just kind of following up on that idea, tell us a little bit about your work, because I know it spans decades. I know I remember working, when you were working on your dissertation, you came to Laredo and we visited at Monty with one of the person that you write about in the book, Alice Dickerson Montemayor. So could you just speak a little bit about that, and all the way up to the award-winning book where you're still doing that work?
Yes, thank you again for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you on this panel. But I guess I should first say that I started to become a young historian in 1978 as a sophomore. And so as a sophomore, I started to learn that we had a distinctive history that we now call Chicano or Chicana, Latino, Latina history. And I began to pursue that as a field of study. Very early on, I began research on the history of the LULAC organization, League of United Latin American Citizens, which had been in Texas, founded in Corpus Christi in 1929. So 1979 was really about the 50th anniversary of LULAC, and there was no true written history. So I began to do original research. Doing so, I connected with Dr. Arnoldo Vento, a professor of Spanish and Chicano studies at UT Austin, where I was a student. He connected me to his mother. His mother was Adelislas Vento, and Adelislas Vento had a trunk of materials dating back to the early 1920s, and she was a major activist from 1929 all the way to 1990. Well, Adelislas Vento was all about the movement and all about promoting male leadership, but she never really let on that she herself was a major activist. So I did not focus on her. I went on to finish the senior honors thesis. I went to UCLA and did my graduate work there. Studying LULAC news, I discovered Alice Dickerson Montemayor of Laredo, who I found out was the first major feminist in LULAC in the 1930s. And so I did interview Alice Dickerson Montemayor, who is highlighted in the Revolutionary book. And I prepared an article about her, talking about how she fought machismo in the LULAC organization. LULAC was founded by men for men in 1929. The early 30s, they created segregated chapters for women. Alice Dickerson Montemayor was a major activist, a president of LULAC in Laredo, and argued against machismo in LULAC in a couple of articles, one called Son Muy Hombres, another one called Women's Opportunity in LULAC. She left LULAC right around the time of World War II. She did not have a lasting feminist impact, but nonetheless, we see a feminist moment within the LULAC struggle. Likewise, Adelislas Vento did not join LULAC, but she was an advocate for women's engagement in LULAC and women's civic participation. She was from the Valley, and she single-handedly worked individually against racial segregation, women's rights, and other issues at the time. So they are both now deceased. Both of them are very important to the history of the LULAC organization.
And I would say to the history of Chicanas in Texas and the history of just in American history, the feminist movement as well, often they don't look our way when they're telling that history. So muchas gracias, Cynthia. That was exactly what I had hoped you would expand on and take us in another direction now, I'm going to ask Kathy, because she's the illustrator, the artist, whose contributions to the book extend beyond being the co-editor to also illustrating the images of all these women that are in there, 18 women. So Kathy, can you tell us perhaps about the most challenging ones, or your process? How did you come to, I can't even begin to imagine, for example, to depict La Malinche or La Virgen de Guadalupe right along with Alice Dickerson Montemayor. How did you come to that as an artist?
Well, my husband Lionel is an artist, and I asked him to collaborate with me on the illustrations and the inside of the book. The book cover is a painting that I did specifically I put through my hat in the ring for the cover with this painting. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that it would be selected, but I was really thrilled when it was. But for the inside, I asked Lionel to collaborate with me on that. He is super fast and great with a pencil and a likeness. So our process was this. I was familiar with the subjects in the book from working on the book and looking at all the pieces and reading them and making comments and all of that. So I just went a little further and found images of the subject of the book. Lots of them lived since the advent of photography, but some of them obviously lived before that. But there are images of from people's imagination or from illustrations way back that give you some indication of how the person is perceived. So what we did was I would come to the table with a concept. I think this person ought to have wings, and I think the wings ought to have a pencil and a pen and a pistol. I think this person should have this word in a halo shape around them because it's central to their theory of identity and bringing your identity together. And this person should be standing in front of jail bars, and there should be pecans in her border. So I came to the table with those ideas. Lionel took his pencil, and this one should be holding a sign that says "No más machismo." And Lionel took his pencil and he made these really beautiful pencil drawings, very realistic, a lot of shading, light and shadow. And then I took my pen and essentially reduced. It was a destructive process. I reduced the pencil drawing and put it in my hand as an ink drawing, and took away a lot of the very realistic parts and kept the line drawing, and then filled in the details of the costume or the little bits, the symbols and so forth that would help you put this person in a certain history, a certain time and place. And so that's how we did it. And I tell people, I'm sure it was more fun for me than it was for him, because I didn't have to see somebody mark all over my pencil drawing and erase the pencil drawing from underneath. But I think it turned out really well. So well, in fact, that Trinity University Press has, in response to a suggestion by Sandra Cisneros, has agreed to do a coloring book of the illustrations in the book. So we're very happy about that. We're going to add in some new characters who are actually alive at this moment and make it expanded a little bit. But yeah, it's going to be a coloring book made out of the illustrations. So we're happy about that.
That's outstanding. I'm so glad that that's in the works. And yeah, the what you mentioned about the reason I was putting them up there is because as we were hearing you talk, I was thinking, oh, there's people out there who may not have seen the book and don't know what we're talking about. But you can see from these images how appropriate a coloring book would be. Yeah, there it is. There's La Malinche.
There's La Malinche
wearing a huipil.
She's wearing a huipil. There's a little Spanish explorer ship as a hat on her head, and she says, "Se habla nahuatl." So, there's a little humor, and there's just, a way to be engaging, a little bit different approach to an illustration, but with some symbolism and iconography that helps you add a little to the story, understand a little bit about the person that you're looking at.
Excellent. Now, Ellen, the book is divided into 3 sections: 1910, pre-1910, and then contemporary. Part of that, I guess you would call it epistemology of how books are put together and how you conceive of the notion of a book. Yes, you can dip into the book at any point and read a biography, but you could also read it chronologically in the book. It's not chronological in the text. And so I'm just curious, and if you could tell us about the ideas of putting in the ancestors like La Malinche and somebody that the Virgen de Guadalupe, a saint, alongside of Frida Kahlo and some of these other artists, other mujeres valientes who are in there because of their revolutionary passion. So could you give us a context for that?
Well, I think that women as a whole are the bearers of culture in families. We're the ones that teach how to behave in families. We teach about rituals, we teach about traditions and so forth. Traditions and rituals don't just come out of nothing. They're always based on something. So culture is a reflection of everything that is around us and what has gone on beforehand. So they're the shoulders that we stand upon. So as women in this book, we collaborated, which again is a very cultural tradition among women. We collaborate to make tamales, we collaborate to make buñuelos, we collaborate on quinceañeras, etc., etc., etc. So we are collaborated in this book with our ancestors. And how much more beautiful can you do that than to say, this is who the Virgen de Guadalupe is, and that this is what she stands for. I'm not Catholic, I'm Methodist. So what does she have as a meaning for me culturally? Well, I had to go through this deconstruction aspect for myself. And so what the Virgen de Guadalupe is a cultural, historical symbol if you are not a Catholic. But in saying that, I recognize the power of this Queen of the Americas who influenced all of the Americas. That is astonishing. How could we not acknowledge and give tribute to that? So I think that not just giving the tribute, but having that voice articulated and documented to say what her thoughts were, what it is she was voicing about, means that some people might say it's a myth. It's not. It is what it is in terms of a place in history. And Cynthia can speak to that much more clearly, I'm sure. But the other hand is Sor Juana. I mean, a philosopher, the first philosopher in the Americas that nobody knows about. I remember my early years in the 70s at UTSA asking people teaching in philosophy, have you included Sor Juana? They had never heard of her. How can you not have heard of the first woman that articulated this in the Americas? So everything came from across. So yes, we have footsteps from all over the world, but we have some that we have to acknowledge that are representative of the Americas. So culture is extremely important to understand who we are and what we stand for, and what it is we believe in, and how it is that we see the world, and how it is that we perceive the world. So culture allows us to do that. So I think what we're doing with this book is opening it up for everyone who doesn't know about these significant people to understand and to think about different ways of believing and different ways of seeing and different ways of understanding. So cultural studies does that for us. So I think that then you link all of that to the idea of who am I? Well, híjole, as we say in Spanish, I, Ellen Riojas Clark, in San Anto, as a Methodist in a Spanish-speaking congregation, who do all these people represent with me? Well, the indigenous people represent all these symbols and figures on my scarf that have multitudes of layers in terms of belief systems and in terms of tradition. So the study of culture helps us to understand who we are, to acknowledge it in a very vibrant way, and to be able to understand this bi-national, bi-cultural world we live in and to find our place. Culture is so important for us to be able to be successful as women, as people of color, and just as human beings.
I'm so glad that you stressed some of the points that you're making, because of course it's not just for this book, but in a lot of our work, but especially highlighted in the book. I mean, the revolutionary women, and I'm not going to go there right now, but I would like to talk about the definition of revolutionary. But I am going to ask Cynthia, because her work as a historian is revolutionary and feminist. I always talk about Cynthia Rosco, Chicana feminist historian or feminist Chicana historian, because of her work that is so focused on our women, on the ancestors. But also, I think, like you were saying earlier, Ellen, the motivation and the inspiration that going to the past brings us to the present. So Cynthia, could you tell us a little more about how you see yourself in this book, how you're being included in a hybrid book, because it has all kinds of different artists, historians, literary scholars, novelists. How do you see yourself fitting in?
Well, I think it's about time that we've had a book like this. I want to thank Marta Cortera, one of our earliest Chicana historians in Texas in the late 70s. She wrote 2 books, an important one called Diosa y Hembra, which I think made many of us, including myself, aware that we had a separate and distinctive history that was attached to gender, because before so much was race and class-based. Of course, now we have people doing sexuality as well. But anyway, so there are very few of us who are Latina historians in the United States. And so we still have very few historians who are studying gender and women in Texas. So this is a major contribution. It also follows the work of Teresa Acosta in her book on Tejana history. It also follows the numerous entries that are now available in the Handbook of Texas. Teresa Acosta, myself, Maria Cristina Garcia wrote articles for that. They are now becoming part of the Texas history curriculum. But really, still, we have too many books that do not include us. We now have the research. We now have numerous books, and they simply need to be utilized. So thank goodness we have a book like this that focuses on individuals. People like biography. Again, Alice Dickerson Montemayor is my focus in that book. And then my own separate book, Agent of Change, focuses on Adela Slas-Bento. And interestingly enough, we now know that she is perhaps one of the major Latina activists from the 20s on to the 1990s. And we did not know a thing about her. We knew very little about her. Now we know that she really is equivalent to a Rosa Parks for our Mexican-American civil rights movement in Texas, active in the Mexican-American Civil Rights Movement and the Chicano movement all the way to 1990.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad for your research, your archival research, as well as the interviews and other kinds of research. And I'm going to turn it slightly around now, talking to Kathy. From a personal perspective, could you tell us which was your favorite to draw and maybe your favorite to read of all of these?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think that
you are refusing my question.
Yeah, that's like, which of your children is your favorite? As a mother, you'd never go there, whether it's true or not, you never go there. I love you all the same, that's the end of my story. I'll never change that. But
okay, let me rephrase it. Which one was the most challenging to draw?
Well, I've already painted and drawn Nawiolin a couple of ways. So I'd have to say that she was the concept that was the hardest work, because I already picked the low-hanging fruit on how I would depict Nawiolin, and I had to give it more thought and think about how to approach that. And so that's she was the most challenging, but she actually turns out to be one of my favorite drawings. And I probably won't be able to find her right now because I want to, but she's depicted nude. She was an artist's muse and a photographer's muse, and posed nude for photographs way before women did that. And she was very avant-garde, and she was very upfront and vocal about her body and her sexuality and her emotions and her intelligence and her artistic ability. So I conceived her in the nude with her long braids, which is, you can find pictures of her with her long braids, and later you see pictures of her with this amazing haircut that she had to have done herself. It's one of those where you get really mad and you go, but I'd already painted her like that, so I wanted to choose this one, and then put wings on her, and in the wings there are pencils and pens and pistols, because there are these stories about her and her boyfriend, her lover, where she wakes him up in the middle of the night with a pistol to his head because she suspects he's been with another woman. So she's just wild and wonderful, but I had to work a little harder to conceive her drawing than the others.
Sounds to me that she was the most challenging and perhaps the favorite.
And maybe, yeah, well, you get to say that.
Ellen, just kind of along those same lines about the favorite or the one, you wrote a piece on Gloria Anzaldúa for the book. Could you, in a few words, tell us why you chose Gloria Anzaldúa?
Well, I think that Gloria, and here's her picture, very understated woman, very humble looking, and that belies her influence. And to me, she's significant for me because having gone to school in the 70s and all I read about when the Mexican American study started, it was all about the men who wrote, the literary people. I went to Trinity, had a wonderful professor there, white male who knew Mexican American literature, but knew nothing about any women in literature. So it was not until I started studying with José Limón and Tomás Rivera and people like that, who I became aware of the women who were starting to write poetry in Quinto Sol and so forth. And along that way, finding the works by Sherry Moriaga and Gloria that shook my world. All I can say, it shook my theoretical world. that I had to study of who was this woman that said all the things that she talked about, living in borders, crossing borders, living in this mid space in the world, finding who you are based on all of that. And that was Gloria. So my essay in the book's a little different. It's not an academic one. It's a personal story in terms of what she meant to me. And it kind of relates to why our young women need these symbols. Because the reason I also identified with Gloria is that we shared a lot. And it was just seeing this woman who was short like me, un poquito redondita like me, and having a physical deformity. I had one eye, well, I still have just one eye. So always knowing that people look at you differently, and because the biggest significance of how other people perceive you is on your physical being. And so a lot of that is your color, and then anything else that is seen among you. So that was the first attraction. But then to know that she had the tongue that she did like a serpent, and the brain that she did, she explored all these elements, was the most exciting thing. And like I said, it really turned my theoretical work around, because from that day on, what the framework for my work became based upon Gloria Anzaldúa, and to this day. So she was significant in the sense that she was not just a philosopher, not just a literary writer, but a real person who conceptualized thought that has affected the academic world in a very, very revolutionary world. From the queer studies, from gender studies, from cultural studies, on and on and on. I don't think there's any other woman, white, brown, or black, that has affected it to that point. So that's why I love, why I wrote about her. And you asked which drawing really also you liked. Well, I also loved Chavela Vargas. Look at that painting. The one about Anzaldúa, she's very humble, understated. Chavela Vargas, you see her standing up. Her hair is flying. That scarf is jauntily around her neck. And you can see her shoulders back, and you see an instrument. So what you do know about her right from that drawing is that she can project a voice, lyrics, and being. So I think the combination of these illustrations that really captured the essence of people are so important in this book.
Absolutely, they do. They reflect it like a good illustrator, right? Cynthia, last question for you, because then we're going to go into the Q&A. Just very quickly, what are you working on now? What are your future plans?
Well, I actually am waiting for my third book to come out this year, Pioneer of Mexican-American Civil Rights, Alonso S. Perales. Perales was from Alice, but is the principal founder of LULAC and was in San Antonio between 1930 and 1960. So this really is a history of San Antonio from the 30s to the 60s. And it's the history of LULAC, which is really, I would argue, our most important Latino civil rights organization in the United States in the 20th century. So I'm anxious for that to come out. I also have an essay in a book that's coming out on J.T. Canales, another founder of LULAC and the major author of the LULAC Constitution. And that book, Reverberations of Violence, will be coming out this June. So I look forward to the Perales book, and I hope San Antonio is waiting for this book.
I know I am. I'm really anticipating all of that work, and thank you for doing it. Lucy has a question for Kathy. What was the inspiration for the cover artwork? And then Celia Perez has another question that says, were there women you didn't include for lack of space or because you could not find enough information on them? And do you anticipate a second volume? And I guess Ellen and Kathy, you can address that last question. But Kathy, what was the inspiration?
Well, so this is cool because it's going to segue into our definition of revolutionary in the book. So our definition of revolutionary is twofold. One, actions that threaten the established order, and or a transformative action that makes society new. So when I began to think about what my entry was going to be in the cover art contest, I decided to combine symbols, which obviously we're sort of getting to the fact that I do a lot of that in my work. So here you go. This isn't surprising, but so here's the woman. She has the bandolero. So she relates to the soldarera, who is the part of the core group of women that we talk about during the Mexican Revolution of 1910. She has a tree of life crown that says Viva la Revolución. And she has these big wings because butterflies are symbolic of transformation. So she was my shot at a woman who symbolized the kind of revolutionariness that we were talking about. Everything from the bullets to the wings and the crown are designed to make you think about the different aspects of revolution and how the woman is at the center of that. She's at the core of that.
Excellent. There's your answer, Lily. And Celia, who asks, were there women you did not include for lack of space or because you could not find information?
Well, the fact we couldn't find information is one thing, but there were countless women. For space, we could only address the ones that we selected. Are there more? You can do it 100-fold for each of those. Is there a second book? There probably will be, but more than anything, I hope that there'll be hundreds of more books as women or whoever wants to study and bring them to the forefront. The field is rich and fertile, so we want the next my legacy, I'm the oldest one here, would be that it inspires many more researchers and writers to continue in the same element.
Another question from Lucy is actually more, I think, about process. Although she says first, what do you believe is the common thread between the women featured in the book? I think it's that they're revolutionary in the way that Kathy has defined. But the other question says, do contributors propose their own subjects, or did you start with a list of possible entries, or a combination of both? And I happen to know that you had both of those things going on. And but why don't you talk about the process of selection and then actually getting the essays in?
Okay, yes, we had combination, but I think that as an academic, I had, and being the oldest, had a lot of background history about people who had been writing for some time on these different topics. So there were very logical conclusions as to who we got in terms of the academics, the scholarly work to do this. Then others were maybe things we had read about. I knew Sandra Cisneros, a good friend of Kathy's and mine, had written about Chavela Vargas many times. Also, when she wrote about Elia. So we had followed up on people who had published some element of some, like Elena, who had written about the soldaderas and then had it in Spanish, which we had then had it translated. And so people like a journalist who might have done some work in a hometown like Uvalde, a very racist area, and knew that they had written about that. Carmen Tafoya had done a children's book on Ematenayuca, so it was a matter of putting it in, fleshing it out. in this kind of work. So there was a variety, and I think that's what makes the book accessible to everyone, many different ways to approach the voices of women.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll add just a bit to that. So yes, we started by honing down a list, and then we said, who's the best person to do the essay or to contribute the essay? And the main idea was it would be a person who would be passionate about that person, about that topic, about that biography, either having researched it a lot or written about it before, or that sort of thing. So, and that's really what led us to having this book that has a revolutionary format. You know, come to find out, which I didn't know because this is my first hop down the publishing trail, but these books that combine literary essays and scholarly work and reportage don't exist. It's not a category. It's hard to categorize. And the publisher, you know, God bless Trinity University Press, they kept looking to find the right readers for the book because it doesn't fit into a slot that was already defined. But the idea that we would pick the person who was the most passionate about that topic led us to this revolutionary format, which is so accessible, as Ellen says. And we were very, very staunch about that. You know, this is the way it's going to be. We're going to tell these stories in a variety of ways. So there'll be something for every reader.
And it is indeed a real diverse grouping of both authors of the essays and content, the subject matter. Jennifer Steed wrote a beautiful introduction. She's one of your co-editors as well. So I just wanted to kind of shout out to Jennifer. And I know one of my favorites is Alicia Gaspar de Alba's on Sor Juana. She's the expert, right? So who else? And so I can see the process in the product. There's a question for Ellen and Cynthia. Is there a particular part of the book that resonates with you, resonates more with you, and why? I was just reading, not thinking about what I was saying. So Cynthia or Ellen?
My response is going to also relate back to the question about who we got, because I think one of the questions that's going to come up about the book was one of the most controversial one we had in the discussion of who wrote that piece. And that was about La Malinche. And I was very, very adamant about that fact that really, a personal opinion, that I did not think a Chicana could, or any other person, write about La Malinche, because she is a Mexican symbol. What we found in Mexico was, of course, not much writing by women about La Malinche. It's always about by men. And it's a very controversial figure. So maybe it was an easy out. I don't know. It was what we were able to find. And that was Laura Esquivel's chapter on La Malinche, and in a literary book. So it's not a historical account. She's the one that wrote like Water for Chocolate. So writing about La Malinche, and she's also a diplomat, was I felt a very neutral way to describe someone we really needed. But what it also says is so much work is needed to be able to really articulate La Malinche from this binational interpretation of her. And I think that that's the other beauty of the book, is that it is a truly collaborative effort between Mexico and the United States and Texas and of course San Antonio. And so I think that it just speaks to the need for mucho más.
Absolutely. And that leads to the last question that we have. And Jay Menchaca is asking Dr. Orozco, what can we do to inspire young women to become writers, perhaps historians? this book is a great start.
Yes, I would say to everybody to continue reading, to access what's already there, to pick up on people that we still don't have much information about. We have somebody who's now writing a full biography of Jovita Gonzalez, a Texas Tejana folklorist, and we've known about her since the 70s at least, and we're just barely going to get a biography. Likewise, I know some folks, Dr. Carmen Tafoya and Cheryl Tenayuca have been working on the Tenayuca biography for over a decade. So we have those things there. Becoming a historian is a very hard, long journey because you have to go on to graduate school. But at the same time, anybody can be a historian. I mean, you can take a topic and go with it and put it on social media or newspapers. So you don't even have to have a degree to do the kind of work that needs to be done.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned those biographies that are in the works. I have a list of women that I wish somebody would be writing biographies about, like Jovita Idar and Gloria Influence. Actually, all the women in the book who would merit their own biographies.
Yes, and Dr. Gabriela Gonzalez of UTSA is writing a biography of Jovita Idar, and she's somebody that's not in the book. Delaslas Vento was not in the book. So you see, we still have even more people that could fit into volume 2 or volume 5, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. So any last comments very quickly, Ellen?
I think that we're so happy to be doing this and fascinated, absolutely fascinated by the interest and all of the speaking engagements we've had, because all that says is this book is filling a little bit of a void and need.
Absolutely. Kathy, you're muted.
No, I wanted to say how great it's been to spend this hour with Dr. Orozco, because in the process, in the whole 10 years of doing this, we've never gotten the group together face to face. Everything was accomplished by phone, email, real mail, all kinds of stuff like that. The editing process, even, so it has been a joy for me to spend face-to-face time with one of our honored contributors in the book. It's been great. I really loved it.
Cynthia, any last comments? And unmute. You're still muted.
Am I just that there are books about us, and the real task is to get the Texas Education Department to allow our history into the Texas curriculum. That's where one of our major challenges has been.
Huge.
Thank you all, 3 of you. We are getting a lot of comments from what I see that they tell me from the audience that these are amazing and wonderful mujeres. So thank you for participating. Thank you to the San Antonio Area Foundation for sponsoring our session. And thank you to the Texas Book Festival. Lily, you are wonderful. Good job. Just, what can I say? Gracias. I got emotional because I think this is really important work we're doing. Muchas gracias.